Hello! In this video we're going to have a look at how to set up Xdebug's profiling, including all the options that are available. I'm starting out with the Symfony demo application. At the moment I'm running this with PHP's built-in web server. When I request a page, you'll see the log line showing up here on the command line. There has been more than one request, as you can see. The first thing that we need to do is to configure Xdebug in profiling mode. If you're on the command line, you can use the Xdebug mode environment variable to select Xdebug's mode. That's all you need to do to set up profiling. Now let's click around in the demo application. This should have created a few profiling files. By default, these files are stored in the temp directory with the name cachegrind.something. As you can see, we have one file here. Let's have a quick look what is in there. This file describes all the function calls, how long they took, etc, etc. It isn't meant to be read by a human, but instead by a visualization tool. I'm going to have a look at kcachegrind later. However, we visited different URLs, but there's only one profiling file. This is because in its default setting, the profiling file name uses the process ID of the PHP process that ran the PHP request. In this case, my process ID was the following. This isn't very useful if you want to look at the profiling output of multiple files. So let's change this. I am going to make this change on the command line, but of course you can also do this in PHP ini. You can however not do this in the htaccess file because everything related to the profiler needs to be configured before the request starts. Xdebug's profiler has to start at the start of the request and cannot be started later or for a small part of the application at the moment. First, let's have a look at how to configure the profiling file name. You can configure the profiling file name output by using the xdebug.profiler_output_name setting, which by default, as I said, is set to cachegrind.out.%p, which stands for the process ID. As I mentioned, you can set this in PHP ini, but this documentation also shows you that you can set this through the xdebug_config environment variable, which is what we'll be using here. The formatting letters to use for the file name are the same as the ones you'd use for configuring a trace output name. The documentation for that setting lists all the supported specifiers. Because the Symfony demo application, as well as many other applications, always use the same routing file, index.php, it isn't very useful to use the script name in the output format. The best one here is to use the %R specifier because that includes the full request URI. Sometimes it's also useful to use PHP session ID or a combination of settings. For example, %H for the HTTP host and then using %R to also get a request URI. In my case, I'm only interested in the request URI, so that's what I'll be using. I would however recommend to keep the prefix of the file name cachegrind.out because most of the tools will be looking for this. Let's modify the command line now to configure Xdebug's profiler output file names. The xdebug_config environment variable allows you to set a specific set of Xdebug's settings. However, it cannot be used to set all of them. The documentation will indicate which ones can be used here, which includes our profiler output file name. As I said, we should leave the common prefix. And then behind this cachegrind.out, we will use %R to use the request URI. Now let's click around the Symfony demo application again. Perhaps we'll use the backend this time. We have now clicked around a little bit, so let's see which files we have gotten on our file system. And here we have it, a few profiling files that we have just created. Let's open a cachegrind file again. As I said before, this is not a file you should be looking at yourself in a text editor. But what should you use instead? If you're on Linux, I would recommend to use kcachegrind. I have kcachegrind installed, so let me use that to open a few profiling files that we've just created. I'll be using one of the EN files. Kcachegrind is a very powerful tool, but sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming of what it is showing. I'll give a tour of kcachegrind in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe. And I'll hope to see you in the next video.